Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I am doing my picks for the final weekend of the Summer Showdown qualifiers. Week 18, I believe, of the Overwatch League. A lot of really big matches this weekend. A lot of things I want to talk about today, so let's get into it. Real quick though, I do want to say that I will be uploading my recap for this weekend a little later than usual, probably up Tuesday of next week, just because I will be out of town through Monday. So the video might go up later in the day, Tuesday, but it should still be up. If not, don't worry, I'll have my bracket predictions as well before we get into the Summer Showdown itself. But with that out of the way, let's jump in and let's talk about the matches for this weekend. We kick off in the APAC region with a match between the Chengdu Hunters and the Guangzhou Charge. And then the Hunters right now are the third best team in the APAC region in this particular meta. They look really good against most of the competition they've played. The teams they've struggled against are Seoul and Shanghai, who are the top two teams in this region right now. No doubt about it in terms of this specific meta. So I think Chengdu is in a very good position in this series. Guangzhou are playing better. They have started to step up this stage with the new roster additions. I think they definitely have a shot to make the tournament based on what we've seen from them. But I'm just not convinced enough right now that they're going to be able to pull it out in this particular match against a Hunters team that I think right now is just simply better. And so I'm going to say this one goes the direction of the Chengdu Hunters in a score of 3-1. I think the Hunters have shown more. I think they've looked more consistent. Even though I think Jimmy's looked very, very good for the Charge, and I think that has really helped the team a lot. And the team around him has definitely improved with Xerneas being in the roster now and Krong being full-time. They look a lot better, but the Hunters right now just are the better team of the two, and they take this one. Moving on, the LA Valiant are taking on the Shanghai Dragons. Like I said, the Shanghai Dragons are one of the top two teams in this region right now based on what we've seen so far. I think that bodes very, very well for them, as I think they are likely to be the team that wins this match. I think that the Valiant have struggled a lot so far this season. I think the Valiant have not looked nearly as good as what you kind of would want from a team that is going up against one of the top teams in the region right now. So I think the Dragons take this one pretty easily. I think they win it. I think it is a 3-0 win for the Dragons over the LA Valiant. Moving on to the Western region, I have my first big pick game of the weekend, which is the LA Gladiators taking on the Atlanta Reign. This is a massive, massive match for both of these teams if they want to make the Summer Showdown. The Gladiators, I believe, have to win either 3-1 or 3-0 to have a chance to make the Summer Showdown. Even if they win 3-0 or 3-1, it doesn't guarantee themselves a spot. It just gives them a chance to move on and get to the tournament. Whereas the Reign, 2-win team right now, would love to get a win, get themselves at 3-3. Pretty much guarantees them, if not outright guarantees them, a spot in the tournament. Obviously, it keeps the Gladiators down as a 1-win team. That's a team you don't have to worry about. You get to 3 wins, you feel pretty safe and confident in your ability to get into the tournament. So this is a huge game with a lot of implications. We saw some changes from the Gladiators this past weekend as they brought Space in, but the Junker Queen as opposed to Reiner, who was playing it for the majority of this tournament cycle. They looked a lot better, but they also played the Paris Eternal, so it's hard to really gauge whether or not they are truly looking a lot better. Reign have had some struggles this tournament. Of course, they lost to the Boston Uprising. They lost to the Toronto Defiant. And last weekend, they lost to the Houston Outlaws. So they've lost to some good teams in Toronto, or Toronto, if you will, and Houston, but they also lost to a weak Boston team. So they're a bit of a tough one to crack, but they also have added Vigilante, and of course, Speedily came of age last weekend. So their roster now is significantly stronger and deeper than it was when they lost to Boston a few weeks ago. So it is going to be interesting to see how this matchup goes, because like I said, even a win from the Gladiators doesn't necessarily mean they make the tournament. And if it's a close enough series, it doesn't mean the Reign, if they lose, get eliminated. So it's a really big game. I think it's probably the biggest game in the weekend when it comes to specific tournament implications, because this game is a difference realistically between one team making it, both teams making it, or neither team making it. I don't know if there is a world where both teams can make it. A 3-1 win for the Gladiators might keep the Reign alive, but I don't think if it goes that way, they have a great shot, but I could be wrong. But it definitely is, potentially one team makes it, potentially no team make it, depending on what happens. So it's a really, really close match. I think the Gladiators did look much improved last weekend. I think Space coming in may have had a lot to do with it. Also, though, like I said, they played the Paris Eternal. So it's hard to really gauge how much better the Gladiators are. Skewed and Funny Astro have not looked great so far this tournament cycle. They looked okay this past weekend. I'm curious to kind of see what happens now then when there's most likely going to be a matchup between Space and Hawk this time around. I don't think they're going to put Reiner in. I think Reiner struggled too much. I don't think he was doing very well in this meta mentally. And I think you just have to put Space in to really be that kind of guy to focus your team. He's a very, very, very good leader, based on what we've seen from him in the past. So I think that's really what the Gladiators need. The rain is going to come down to whether or not the Speedily and Vigilante diff is enough to really bring them over the edge. Can Speedily outplay Kevster? How is it going to be between Kai and Happy? There's a lot of things there. Vigilante matching up against Skewed, who hasn't looked great. OG matching up against Funny Astro, who hasn't looked great. It's a really close matchup between two really, really good teams. I think it's going to be a fun one to watch. I think it'll be close, which is unfortunate for the Gladiators. You don't want it to be close for them. You want to be able to win pretty strong, and I think they understand this is a very important series for them. But I just think the Reign have played too well for this to be a blowout, for this to be a one-sided affair in either way. So, unfortunately for the Gladiators, I don't think the result is going to go in a way that helps them make the Summer Showdown. But I do think the Gladiators do overall look more solid right now. I think they should be able to pull this one out. The Reign have not looked unbeatable in this tournament, and so I think the Gladiators will take it in a score of 3-2. Doesn't get them that Summer Showdown spot, but it does at least help them kind of keep some of that ground they have in the tournament, or in the overall standings over a team like Dallas, who's kind of hot on their heels. Dallas is already in the tournament, so they're going to get at least one extra point, possibly 2 or 3 extra points, which potentially could bump the Gladiators to third. So there's definitely a lot of things that could affect the Gladiators. For them, they just need to get a win. They need to focus on getting a win, hoping they can get, maintain a 1 or 2 point lead over the Fuel as we head into the Summer Showdown. That's kind of what the Gladiators' priority should be. Get a win here. Maybe you don't win the tournament, but at least you get an extra point and win, which could help you as the season progresses. Moving on to the second match on Friday, New York Excelsior take on the Paris Eternal. Another game with a somewhat big implications, because New York Excelsior have 2 matches this weekend, and if they win both of those matches, they have a very realistic shot at being in the tournament. They might even be guaranteed a spot in the tournament if they win both of their matches. And the first one that they have to do that with is the Paris Eternal. New look Paris Eternal. We haven't seen the New York Excelsior play this new Paris Eternal roster. Who knows what this Paris team looks like right now in terms of their peak. They haven't looked incredible. I think the team is together. I don't remember exactly, but I think they managed to get all the players together, I assume, in Dallas. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how the Eternal play as the new roster kind of starts to gel and mesh together. I have not been impressed with New York. I mean, yes, they had that win against Houston, but arguably New York looked better in 2 maps in that series. And, half of Dorado, where they just had a really good defense that really kind of brought them over the edge. I don't think New York was particularly strong this series, or this season. They struggled the second half against Dallas. They didn't look good against Vancouver. They didn't look good against the Shock. Yeah, these are good teams, but they haven't given me enough promise to think they'll be able to, dominate any teams they play right now. So I think this one has the potential of a very close series. I just don't know what to expect from New York at this point. Anson J is still playing on ping. That could be a problem. It wasn't that big of a problem against Houston, so maybe it's not that big of an issue. Ultimately, I look at this matchup and I just think New York just doesn't have what I want from them so far. When they look really good in this meta, they look really good, but the Eternal roster has more experience in this meta. That is just a fact. They've played it a lot more often, and I think the Eternal, if they're going to get a win with this new roster, this is the match it's going to happen in. And so I think that it's going to be a closer series. And maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe New York should be able to beat this Paris team pretty easily, but New York hasn't impressed me enough, and I don't really expect a lot from them. So I'm actually going to pick the Paris Eternal to take this one, which is definitely a hot take because I don't think Paris has looked particularly good, but I also don't think New York has looked particularly good. Their one win was okay. Obviously, it's a good team, but the win itself was not that impressive in my eyes. So New York, they have lost a lot of stock in my eyes this tournament as it has continued to progress. I think that they lose this series. I think it's a 3-2 for the Eternal. Absolutely could be wrong on this one, but that's just how I see it right now. I think it's a very, very interesting match that New York is unable to take away, unfortunately. Final match on Friday. Another big game. Dallas Fuel take on the San Francisco Shock. Not a big pick, but a big game. Obviously, these are top two teams in the Western region right now. The results of this could also have very big impacts on the standings. They're both undefeated right now. If Toronto can go through and win their match this weekend, they could potentially jump the loser of this match on differential. I don't know if they can jump the Shock, but they definitely can jump the Fuel in terms of differential. What's interesting about the Shock and the Fuel is they actually have had a very similar schedule this stage. Of their 5 opponents so far, they have 4 of the exact same opponents, which are Boston, Florida, New York, and the LA Gladiators. The difference is that the Fuel played the Defiant and the Shock played the Justice. Obviously, both of those teams won all of their games, but they're very, very similar in terms of what they've done. I would say that the Fuel played a slightly better team than the Defiant, but the Shock game against the Justice was before the Justice kind of blew up their roster, so they're comparable, I think, in terms of their schedules as a whole. And so I think when you look at those and you look at the similar results that they've had, you look at the teams, I think you have to give a lot of credit to the Shock. I think the Shock look like the better team right now. I thought the Shock looked better against New York. They looked better against Boston. They looked better against the Gladiators than the Fuel did. And they looked better against the Mayhem than the Fuel did. Every single common opponent the Shock looked better than. The scoreline was better for the Shock. In every metric, the Shock have looked better than the Fuel when you look at their common opponents in this meta. Fuel, switching between Doha and Sparkle has kind of worked, but not fully. I think this series will probably full commit to Sparkle because you're up against Proper. You want your really hard, talented, really strong, high-impact Genji. That's going to be Sparkle, so I think they'll go with him. Sparkle's map record this tournament is better than Doha. The majority of the maps they've lost so far in this tournament cycle were Doha playing over Sparkle, so definitely could be a close one, definitely could be something to look at, but I think the Shock have looked better. I think that you just look at the numbers, they've just had a better tournament run so far, and so I think the Shock take this one. I'm going to say a score of 3-1 for them. I really do think the Shock right now are pretty significantly better than a lot of the teams in this tournament, and I think that they really are the favorites to win the whole thing in the West for this one. Moving on to Saturday, APAC region, Guangzhou Charge taking on the Hangzhou Spark. This game has massive tournament implications as well. Both of these teams are fighting for a spot in the tournament. Spark sitting at 1-3 right now. Charge sitting at 2-2. So this game could obviously determine kind of what happens. The Charge will have already played the Hunters at this point in time. They might be sitting at 2-3 when this match comes around. So it's a big game for the Charge if they want to get into the tournament. Spark, on the other hand, they have Charge and Fusion this weekend. Two teams that are not playing particularly at the highest level. Charge, I think, are the better of those two opponents right now, and so Spark, this is a big game as well, right? They won't play on Friday, so they have that advantage going for them where they kind of get to see what the Charge are going to do, and then they have the ability to try to go for the win here. I think it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens. The Spark looked a lot better this past weekend with Alpha Yi in over having Architect in. I still don't think they've looked incredible. They didn't look as good as I wanted them or had expected them to look. They are doing some Gushui Bernard switching, which I don't love, but I also think some reason why they did that is because they were struggling. It's an interesting matchup, to say the least. I think it's going to be a good one, and these are two teams that are pretty similarly matched. It really comes down to me to the DPS matchup, and I think right now, Shy Alfie is just so dynamic and so explosive. I think they've looked very, very good whenever they get to play. They're on heroes they're comfortable with. I think that the struggles of the Spark early on this tournament, a lot of those come down to the absence of Alpha Yi. I think they're going to look a lot better this weekend when they play two teams that are not the top 3 teams in the Hunters, in the Dynasty, and the Dragons. I think the Spark are better than a lot of teams right now. They just don't look as good as the Hunters, and they don't look as good as the Dynasty and the Dragons. But none of the other 4 teams or 3 teams at the bottom look that good against those teams either. So I think this one will go the way of the Spark. Somewhat close series. I'm going to say 3-1 win for the Spark. I feel just more confident in them right now than I do in the Charge, and I think they take this one and try to lock up that final spot in the Summer Showdown. LA Valiant versus Chengdu Hunters. Yeah. Chengdu should win this one. They look better than the Valiant do. Valiant have had their moments, especially, I think, with Dia. Dia, I think, is still one of the better Junker Queens in the region. I think he has been mechanically, arguably, the best Junker Queen we've seen in APAC. Maybe in the whole league, but I think definitely in APAC he has mechanically looked like one of the best. But I just think the team around him is just not performing up to the level you want. Easy Han's been okay. Becky's been all right. I don't think Sashin's Briggs look very good, and I don't think that we've seen enough impact out of Lengsa. I think that's really where the team is not kind of keeping their own. But they've had a lot of close series so far this season, so it's not a total wash. I think they just don't have that next leg that they really need. And I think Chengdu looks really good right now. I think Leave and Jinmo are playing at top form. I think that the Hunters have figured out what works for them, and they're rolling with it, and they've looked very solid. So to me, this one should go the way of the Hunters. I think it'll go their way pretty dominantly. 3-0 win over the Valiant for the Hunters as I see it. Final APAC match Saturday is the Seoul Dynasty versus the Philadelphia Fusion. Obviously, this was a pretty surprising upset when these two teams played in the Midseason Madness qualifiers, with the Fusion winning pretty big against the Dynasty, 3-1, if my memory serves me correctly. But the Dynasty look a lot better this tournament cycle. I think that they know what they're playing for. They want that number 1 seed. They want to be able to, go into this tournament with a 6-0 record. Yes, the Fusion are fighting for their lives as well. They want to make this tournament because they have the Hunters on their heels, and they definitely don't want to drop below the Hunters. They would like to try to pass the Spark, I'm sure, as well, if they could. They're only 2 points behind the Spark. If they can kind of jump into this tournament, they could maybe jump the Spark into the standings. So it is a big weekend for the Fusion. But this is a tough one that they have. I think the Dynasty are just too good right now. They haven't dropped a map yet this tournament. I have no real reason to believe they will against the Fusion, because I think the Dynasty have just looked better. Carpe does not look amazing on the Sojourn. I don't think MN3 has looked particularly amazing on the Sojourn either. My biggest thing is I think Fury is a little too aggressive on the Junker Queen, and I think that is the biggest issue that is holding this Fusion team back. I think Aim God's been getting kind of beat up quite a lot as well, and I think those are kind of the things that, to me, hold the Fusion back. Carpe's had some moments this tournament. A lot of people are I think, too harsh on him. Maybe we see MN3, but I think the Dynasty right now, regardless, are just a better team. Moving on to the Western region, we have the Paris Eternal taking on the Florida Mayhem. Mayhem, big game for them if they beat the Eternal, of course. They on the road potentially to a 3-3 overall record in this tournament. This is a big game for them. They would like to be able to beat the Eternal. And as harsh as I was on the Mayhem, the last video I made, I kind of said I don't think they look particularly good. I think they're better than the Eternal. I think the Mayhem, they've tried some weirder stuff. I don't love it. I don't love the double flex support. I didn't like it when New York did it. I didn't like it when Florida did it. I don't think it worked particularly well. To me, it has been a pretty large failure every time we've seen it, so I don't like it. Paris could do some stuff in this series, obviously. It's tough when the Mayhem, I think, just have more talent on the DPS line. I don't know who we're going to see from Florida. If it's going to be Hydron or XC. They've switched between them, and it didn't really have much of a noticeable impact from what I could tell. I would like to see what this Mayhem roster does against teams that I think are definitely easier opponents for them. Ones that I think they should be expected to win. It's more likely, I think, that they win this game than some of the other games they've had so far. These are easier opponents. I think we're going to see a much stronger outing from the Mayhem this weekend than we have in the past couple weekends, because their opponents are much easier. So I think the Mayhem take this one. I'm going to say 3-1 victory for them, getting the dub over the Eternal. Moving on, Houston Outlaws, Washington Justice. Another potentially big game. This one to me is interesting because obviously these two teams are not playing for the same thing. The Justice obviously want to win. They want to keep ground in the overall season standings. They would like to, if possible, move up. Maybe they could jump the Spitfire, stay ahead of the Mayhem. The Mayhem have a very easy weekend, like I've said several times here. If they can, if these two teams have the same record, the Mayhem are going to get in over them because they have more extra points. than the Justice do. So the Justice kind of need to make some more of that space, keep some of that ground. The Outlaws want a spot in the Summer Showdown. They're in a good position to make it, but a win here would be incredibly helpful for the Outlaws in getting to this tournament. Justice, of course, already locked up a spot in this tournament, and so they could potentially, make sure they have a better spot in the tournament. But I think these two teams are playing for two different things, and the Outlaws definitely want a really good spot. They want to lock up a tournament spot. So I think they're going to be a little bit more kind of pressed to do well. These teams also both played the Vancouver Titans last weekend. Houston completely dismantled the Titans. Justice lost to the Titans. So I think right now the Outlaws look to be the better team, despite the fact that they are not qualified yet for the tournament, unlike the Justice. I think the Outlaws should be favored to win. They looked very good last weekend. I thought that they had a very nice bounce-back week after a pretty rough second weekend from them. I think they should win this one. I think they should be the favorites in this one. I think as long as Merritt and Pelican play well, I think that does wonders for this team. Dante has been good enough on the Junker Queen. I think he doesn't have the best ult usage, but I think overall he's a very solid Junker Queen. I think he's made a lot of progress and he's made a lot of steps, and the team looks better with him in. So good look, I think, for the Outlaws. I predicted it to be pretty close. It could easily be a runaway for the Outlaws, just based on, like I said, the comparison of last weekend when both these teams played the Titans, and the results are very, very different. But I'm going to say Outlaws take this one by a score of 3-2. They're playing for a lot more. I think they need that win, and so they will go just that extra mile more and get that win. Final Saturday match is the Boston Uprising taking on the Vancouver Titans. Vancouver Titans, if they win one single map, they will qualify for the Summer Showdown. And this is obviously a very big game as well for the overall standings, because Uprising currently sitting at 5-11. They have 5 points. Titans 3-14. They have 3 points. A Titans win would give them, of course, an extra win, bump up to 4 points, plus would qualify them for the Summer Showdown, which would mean they would then have an additional point for making it to the tournament, which means that they would then have 5 points. So they wouldn't have the tiebreaker because the Uprising have the better record, but so long as the Titans continue to send this momentum going forward, if the Uprising struggle as the season progresses, the Titans have a shot to make that top, get that spot in the play-in tournament at the end of the season. So this is a big game, more for the season standings. Boston, I think, is already eliminated from the Summer Showdown. They can't make it. Titans obviously want to get in, more so for their season standings more than anything else. So it's a big game. I think it is really important to kind of see how this game goes out. Boston just the other day announced that Laurie, no longer their head coach. Who knows what they're going to do with the tank role? Is it going to be Punk? Is it going to be Mag? I don't know. I think I don't think it particularly matters. As much as I think Punk is good, I think Mag is also good. I don't think that's where the problems for this team lie. I think the problems with this team lie in the inconsistencies of Valentine and Victoria. I've said it several times now. I'll keep saying it. I think that's really where this team's weakness is. And I don't think MCD has been particularly impressive. So Titans, to me, are playing with all the momentum in the world, all the energy in the world. They know what's at stake. They know what they need to do in this game. Boston, to me, just feels like a team that's in turmoil. They just fired their head coach. It's a lot going on. I think the Titans should win this one. I think they're the better team right now. I think they take it 3-1 scoreline, get themselves a spot in the Summer Showdown, tie up with the points of the Uprising, and who knows, maybe the Titans have a really nice run in the tournament and even pass the Uprising in points. That would be something wild. Titans look too good right now, in my opinion, to miss out on this tournament, and I definitely don't think that they will lose to an Uprising team who just has not been impressive so far. Hangzhou Spark, Philadelphia Fusion. Like I said before, this is a big game for these teams in terms of potentially jumping over each other. If the Fusion can beat the Spark, they could maybe get themselves a spot in the Summer Showdown. That would give them those points to jump over the Spark in the standings. I don't think it's going to happen. I think the Spark look better right now. I think they're the better team, and I think the Spark should be favored to win this one. Fusion have just not impressed me so far. Their only win this tournament was against the Valiant, and they almost lost. So I don't have a ton of faith in what we've seen from them so far. And the Spark have struggled against some of the better teams, but their performance against the Valiant definitely showed that the Spark are the better team right now. They're the higher performing team. I think with Alfie and Shy, they're just better than the Fusion. I think the Spark take this one. I'll say a score of 3-1, and the Fusion won't get swept, but I think the Spark will generally speaking, controlled the series from start to finish. Final APAC match of the weekend is the Shanghai Dragons versus the Seoul Dynasty. This is my second big pick game of the week. This, I think, looks like it should be the game of the weekend. It is going to be an incredible, match for a lot to play for, assuming that both of the teams win their earlier games in the week, which, like I said, I expect to happen. I don't see that not happening. It's going to be interesting, right? It's going to be really, really, really fun to kind of see what happens, because a lot of the really good teams in the league have really impressed in this meta with the way that they play, and I think these are two of the best teams in the meta as a whole, including East and West. It'd be really, I wish we could see these teams match up with some of the teams in the West, but unfortunately, not to happen. Really, both of these teams obviously have played very similar opponents. The only, Dynasty hasn't played Fusion yet, and the Dragons haven't played Valiant yet. Dynasty haven't dropped the map yet. That's really impressive. The Dragons do have one dropped map this tournament against the Fusion, but other than that, they're also pretty much perfect. I think the Dynasty have looked better on Junker Queen. I think that Smurf's Junker Queen has looked better than Void's. The Void's has also looked pretty good, so I don't think that's an issue. I think the Genji matchup has been pretty similar. Who Are You's looked very good. Stalkers looked very good. I think Lip and Fitz have both looked very, very good. So it really does come down to kind of who has the better Junker Queen. I think Seoul does, and the DPS is pretty much even. Maybe Who Are You's Genji's looked a little bit better than Stalkers, but honestly, I think you can make an argument either way. Stalkers Genji has been incredible, so I don't even know if I believe that. And the support line, and I think the support line is a big part of the thing too. Prophet's Brig has looked pretty good. How good will he look when he's matching up against Lee Jae-gon on, or Izayaki on Brig? We'll see. And Lee Jae-gon versus Vindame on the Lucio, big matchup as well. So there's a lot of really kind of good micro matchups here that really will determine the match. I think it's going to go the distance. I think you have to predict it's going to be a 5-match series of the best two teams in the region right now. Them matching up as the last game of the APAC region for the week is beautiful. But I think the Dynasty right now look like the better team. On paper, they've been better. And I just think right now, from what I've seen of them, I think they've looked more impressive. So I'm going to give the Dynasty a win in this one, 3-2. Close series. I think it's probably the game of the weekend. Usually we say that about a Dynasty Dragons match, and then it ends up being bad. So hopefully this one's good, but that's kind of my matchup of the weekend for the entire weekend. Moving on to the final two matches in the Western region. Toronto Defiant, London Spitfire. I like Toronto a lot. I think they look pretty good. I've not been super impressed by London this meta. They haven't been terrible, but I think the Defiant have looked better so far. So I favor what we've seen from Defiant this tournament. I think they just look better. I think they're really comfortable in this tournament. They want to play in front of their home crowd in a week, and they will do it. They obviously have already made the tournament. So Defiant, to me, should win this one. I think they just have looked better as a whole, and I think they get the win here over the Spitfire, 3-1. And the final match of the weekend is New York Excelsior against the Florida Mayhem. Big implications for this one, obviously. Florida wants to go 3-3. New York potentially also going to go 3-3 if they beat Eternal earlier in the week. That could be enough to get a spot. Getting a point would be really nice if you're New York. Also really nice if you're Florida, because once again, you would like to keep some ground with the Justice, maybe even the Mayhem, catch up to them a little bit. Wouldn't hurt you too much. So it'll be interesting to see what happens here in this matchup, but I think the Mayhem have looked better. I just have not been impressed by New York. You guys know this. New York has hurt me too much. I don't believe in them, and so I think the Mayhem are going to take this one. I think it's going to be a 3-1. I think the Excelsior should be able to take at least one map, but the Mayhem just have looked overall better. Their coaching's been better. I think their play has been better, and so I think they take this one. So I'll just throw out my picks real quick so you can see them all in one place. But like I said, on Friday, on Monday, I want to talk a bit about where I put how my results would make the standings look for the Summer Showdown tournament. So I'm going to throw those up real quick. So if my results were to hold, and my results happen, right, in a hypothetical world where I'm a genius, this would be your tournaments. In the Eastern region, you'd have the Dynasty as the number 1 seed, followed by the Dragons as the 2 seed, with the Hunters as the 3 seed, and the Spark getting in as the 4 seed. Better record than the Charge, Fusion, and Valiant. Gets them in. No tiebreakers there. Every team with a different record. A 6-0, a 5-1, a 4-2, a 3-3, 2-4, 1-5, 0-6. That'd be kind of interesting if that happened. It most certainly could happen, but we'll see what happens there. In the West, lots of tiebreakers that kind of go into determining the spots. But based on my results, you would have a number 1 seeded Shock, a 2 seeded Defiant, getting in over the Fuel by 1 map differential. So the scores of those matches matter for that standings. Then the Titans would get in as the 4 seed with a 4-2 plus 5 record, followed by the Outlaws at 4-2 plus 2, Justice at 3-3 plus 4, Mayhem at 3-3 minus 2, and then the final spot would go to the Atlanta Reign at 2-4 minus 1, getting in over a Spitfire team who they beat earlier in the tournament cycle, so that would be why they hold the tiebreaker there. And they'd get in over a Gladiators team who only would have a minus 2 differential, which would not be enough to get them in over an Atlanta Reign team with a better differential. Spitfire would be 9, Gladiators at 10, and then New York, Uprising, and Eternal closing out your rankings there. So that would be the standings if my stuff were to hold. We'll see what happens. We'll talk about it next week, and we'll see if I was right or not. I probably won't be. There will probably be a bit of a change. Gladiators potentially get in. Excelsior potentially get in over Mayhem. Those are kind of the main ones to look at. But obviously there's only 4 spots in the West, 2 spots in the East, so it'll be interesting to see what happens. That's going to be all for me for today, though. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. A little bit longer than normal, but exciting turn we got coming out, so I really wanted to make sure that this was something I covered. So that's all for today. Let me know in the comments down below who you think is going to make the tournament. If you think I'm right, if you think I'm wrong, let me know. But comments for that, and if you enjoyed the video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But that's going to be all for me for today. Hope you all enjoyed. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.